She added a new contact to her phone in a rush. Her boss had just changed his number for corporate security reasons, and she needed it saved before the next meeting. One misplaced tap, and his number didn't land in the work group chat. It landed in the Brooks Family Madness group, the sacred, unfiltered, absolutely chaotic space where her mother dispensed unsolicited relationship advice. Her sister laughed at everything, and her little brother responded to emotional crises with memes. She didn't notice. But he did. Her mother's message came through that same night. "Imani, when are you going to stop scaring men away with that attitude?" And then the follow-ups. The opinions about her love life. The jokes at her expense. The brutal honesty only a family that truly loves you would dare to speak out loud. He read every word, and he never said a thing. What happened next? The quiet gestures she couldn't explain. The walls that started crumbling between them, and the moment he finally broke his silence in the worst possible way, is a story about love found in the most embarrassing place imaginable. A family group chat with absolutely zero filter. If you love stories that make you laugh, hold your breath, and then absolutely wreck you emotionally, subscribe now and leave a comment telling me, what's the most embarrassing thing your family has ever said about you in a group chat? Stay until the end, because this one is going to surprise you. And when you're done, keep your eyes open for the next one. The thing about working for Jaewon Lee was that you never had to guess where you stood. You stood outside. Everyone did. He maintained a perimeter of silence and precision that no amount of small talk, holiday parties, or team-building exercises had ever breached. In the 2 years that Imani Brooks had served as his executive assistant at Hanul Technologies' Manhattan office, she had learned exactly 3 personal facts about the man. He drank his coffee black. He arrived at 7:15 every morning without exception, and he had never, not once, asked anyone how their weekend was. It wasn't cruelty. Imani had worked for cruel bosses before, the kind who smiled at you in meetings and CC'd HR on emails about your lunch breaks. Jaewon wasn't that. He was simply sealed. A man wrapped in titanium-grade professionalism, operating with the emotional bandwidth of a well-coded algorithm. He thanked her when she handed him reports. His "good morning" came with the exact same inflection every single day. He never raised his voice, never lingered in conversation, never looked at her for 1 second longer than the task required. The office had theories, of course. Christine from marketing believed he was going through a divorce. Daniel from product thought he was ex-military. Priya, the junior designer who had a crush on anything with a heartbeat, was convinced he was secretly romantic and just needed the right person to unlock him. Imani had no theories. She was too busy keeping his calendar from catching fire. Hanul Technologies was a Seoul-based enterprise software company that had opened its New York office 3 years ago as part of an aggressive expansion into the North American market. Jaewon had been sent from headquarters to run it, and under his leadership, the office had gone from a 12-person startup floor to a 90-person operation across 2 floors of a glass tower in Midtown. The man was effective. No one disputed that. But he led like a surgeon, with clean hands, a steady voice, and absolutely no interest in whether the patient liked him. Imani, at 27, had carved out her own kind of competence. She had graduated from Howard University with a degree in communications, spent 2 years at a PR firm that almost broke her spirit, and landed the Hanul job through a recruiter who warned her that the CEO was intense. She had taken the job anyway because the salary was good, the benefits were excellent, and she had student loans that didn't care about anyone's intensity. And she was good at it. Not just good, indispensable. She anticipated his needs before he voiced them, managed his calendar with surgical precision, and had developed a 6th sense for when a meeting was about to go sideways. She knew his rhythms, his preferences, the subtle shift in his posture that meant he was losing patience. She ran his professional life like a conductor runs an orchestra, except the conductor never once looked up from the podium to acknowledge her. That was fine. She wasn't there to be acknowledged. She was there to be excellent. But the rest of her life, the part that existed outside the glass tower, was a different composition entirely. The Brooks family operated on a frequency that could be heard from space. Her mother, Diane Brooks, was a woman who had raised 3 children alone after losing her husband to a heart attack when Imani was 14. And she had done it with the kind of love that came wrapped in opinions nobody asked for. Diane was a retired school secretary who now spent her days volunteering at the church, watching courtroom shows, and treating the family group chat like her personal talk show. Tanya, the eldest at 31, had married a man named Keith 4 years ago and now lived in New Jersey with a toddler, a mortgage, and the unshakable belief that everything Imani did was hilarious. She was the sister who laughed during arguments, who sent voice notes that were 90% cackling, and who had once screenshot Imani's dating profile and sent it to the group chat with the caption, Exhibit A. And then there was Derek, 22, a senior at Stony Brook studying something that changed every semester. Derek communicated almost exclusively in memes, GIFs, and one-word responses that somehow always landed at the worst possible moment. He was the family's emotional comic relief, the one who could diffuse a screaming match between Diane and Tanya with a single image of a confused cat. The group chat, Brooks Family Madness, was sacred. It was where birthdays were planned, gossip was disseminated, prayer requests were made, and Imani's personal life was dissected with the enthusiasm of a true crime podcast. Nothing was off limits, nothing was private, and nothing, absolutely nothing, stayed in the vault. Which is why what happened on the evening of March 11th should have been predictable. But it wasn't, because the universe has a sense of humor that borders on malice. It started with a memo. J1's personal phone number had been changed as part of a company-wide security update, something about the sole office tightening protocols after a data breach scare. The new number came through on an internal email at 4:47 p.m., 13 minutes before Imani was supposed to leave for the day. She grabbed her phone, opened her contacts, updated his entry, and in the same frantic motion, because Derek had just texted her separately asking for the Wi-Fi password at their mom's house. She tapped the wrong chat. She added J1 Lee to Brooks Family Madness. She didn't notice. The app didn't dramatize it. There was no alarm, no warning label, no pop-up that said, "Are you sure you want to destroy your professional reputation?" It just happened. A quiet, invisible catastrophe. By the time she got home to her apartment in Harlem, kicked off her shoes, and opened the fridge, the group chat was already in full swing. The topic, as it was at least twice a month, was Imani's love life, or, more accurately, the absence of one. It had started innocently enough. Tanya had sent a screenshot of a dating app notification, not Imani's, but a friend's, with the caption, "See, Mani, even strangers are out here trying. What's your excuse?" The laughing emojis followed. Then Derek chimed in with a meme of a woman sitting alone at a dinner table set for 2, captioned "Me, myself, and my standards." And then Diane entered the chat. "Imani, baby, I love you. But when are you going to stop scaring men away with that attitude of yours? You walk into a room like you're about to fire somebody. Men don't want a CEO at dinner, they want a woman who smiles." Imani read it and groaned, thumbs already flying. "Mama, I smile plenty. I smiled at a man last week and he thought I was being sarcastic." "That's because you were being sarcastic," Tanya replied, followed by 6 laughing emojis. "I'm just saying," Diane continued, undeterred. "Your father, God rest him. He fell in love with me because I let him feel like he was the most important person in the room. You make people feel like they're in a job interview. Maybe the right man will appreciate a thorough interview process," Imani shot back, knowing full well that her mother would not find this funny. "The right man is going to run in the other direction if you keep this up. You're 27. I had Tanya at 24. Your grandmother had me at 21. You're out here breaking generational records for loneliness." "Mama," Imani typed, adding the skull emoji. "I'm serious. You work too much, you don't go out. And the last man you dated, what was his name, the one with the nice shoes? You told him his 5-year plan was structurally flawed. On the second date." Derek dropped a meme of a building collapsing, captioned, "His 5-year plan after meeting Imani." Even Imani laughed at that one. The conversation spiraled for another 40 minutes. Diane suggested Imani try being softer. Tanya suggested wine. Derek suggested therapy, then immediately followed it with JKLOL and a gif of someone running away. Imani defended herself with humor, as she always did, deflecting the sting with sarcasm and exclamation points and well-timed emojis. But underneath the performance, there was a bruise. Because her mother wasn't entirely wrong. Not about the attitude. Imani's directness was a feature, not a flaw, and she knew that. But about the loneliness. The fact that she hadn't been on a real date in 8 months. The fact that she came home every night to an empty apartment and talked to her family through a screen because it was easier than admitting she wanted someone beside her. That part landed. It always did. She didn't know, couldn't have known, that someone else was reading every word. Jae-won Lee was sitting in his apartment on the Upper West Side, a plate of kimchi jjigae cooling on the counter, his phone open to a group chat he had never joined. The notification had come through at 4:51 p.m., a generic, "You've been added to Brooks Family Madness," and he had almost dismissed it. Almost. But curiosity, or something quieter than curiosity, something closer to loneliness recognizing its own reflection, made him stay. He read the whole thing, every message, every emoji, every devastating, hilarious, painfully honest word that Diane Brooks had typed with the confidence of a woman who believed love was a verb and silence was a sin. He didn't laugh. He didn't react. He sat very still with his phone in his hand and felt something shift behind his sternum, a door he hadn't opened in years, creaking on its hinges. By 10 p.m., the chat had quieted. Imani had sent a final, "Good night, love y'all," followed by a heart emoji. Tanya had sent a kissing face. Derek had sent a gif of a raccoon waving. Jae-won silenced the notifications. He did not leave the group. The next morning, Imani arrived at 7:10, 5 minutes early, as always, and found the office exactly as she'd left it. She pulled up his calendar, arranged his messages, set his coffee on the desk at 7:14. When he walked in at 7:15, she handed him the daily brief. Their fingers didn't touch. They never did. "Good morning, Mr. Lee." "Good morning." The same inflection, the same distance, the same man. Except for one thing. As she turned to leave, he spoke again. A question he had never asked before, in 2 years of mornings exactly like this one. "Did you sleep well?" Imani paused, blinked, recovered. "Yes, thank you," and walked out. At her desk, she stared at her computer screen without seeing it. That was weird, she thought. But the day moved on, and the thought dissolved, and she never checked the group chat member list. She had no idea that the most embarrassing night of her life had just become a quiet, ongoing performance, with an audience of one. The thing about secrets is that they change the person keeping them. Not all at once, not in some dramatic, cinematic way. It happens in increments. A softened edge here, a lingering look there. A question that didn't used to exist in the vocabulary. Jae-won Lee had never been a man who kept personal secrets. He didn't need to. His life was structured with such deliberate minimalism that there was nothing to hide. No vices, no scandals, no messy entanglements. He worked. He ate well. He called his mother in Busan every Sunday. He ran along the Hudson at 5:30 a.m. and was showered and dressed by 6:45. His apartment was clean, his finances were ordered, and his emotional life was a room he had locked years ago, not out of pain, but out of habit. But now he had a secret, and it lived in his phone, vibrating softly at odd hours, filling his screen with the unfiltered chaos of a family that loved each other so loudly it made his chest ache. He told himself he would leave the group. Every night, he opened the chat, read the new messages, and told himself, "Tomorrow, I'll exit. It's the right thing to do. It's a privacy violation. It's inappropriate." Tomorrow never came. Because the Brooks family was addictive in a way he hadn't anticipated. They argued about everything. The correct way to season collard greens, whether Beyoncé's latest album was better than the one before it, whether Derek should switch his major again. They sent voice notes that were entire monologues. Diane shared articles about heart health, and then immediately pivoted to roasting Imani's dating profile. Tanya live texted her toddler's tantrums like a sports commentator. Derek replied to serious family discussions with nothing but a single emoji, usually the skull. And somehow it was always the perfect response. It was noise. Beautiful, senseless, suffocating noise. Jaewon had grown up in a household where noise meant failure. His father, a retired executive, ran their home the way he had run his division at Hyundai, with silence, efficiency, and an expectation of excellence that left no room for mess. Love was expressed through achievement. Affection was implied, never spoken. When his mother laughed too loud at dinner, his father would glance at her, just a glance, and she would quiet herself, fold the joy back inside, and pass the rice. He had inherited that architecture. He had refined it. He had built a career on the principle that emotion was a luxury, and discipline was the only currency that didn't depreciate. And now, every night, he sat in his immaculate apartment and read messages from a woman who called her daughter's independence a curse, and her loneliness a tragedy, and her stubbornness a gift from God, all in the same paragraph. And he felt something he couldn't name, something warm and terrifying and completely unauthorized. The gestures started small. 2 weeks after the incident, Diane mentioned in the chat that her favorite coffee shop in Bed-Stuy had closed. She was devastated. She'd been going there for 11 years, and nobody else got the hazelnut ratio right. She sent 3 sad face emojis and a photo of the shuttered storefront. The next morning, Imani found a small bag on her desk. Inside, a 12-ounce bag of hazelnut blend coffee from a specialty roaster in Brooklyn, with a handwritten note that read, "Overstock from a vendor meeting. Help yourself." There had been no vendor meeting. Imani checked. She stared at the coffee, shrugged, and brewed a cup. It was exceptional. She texted her mom, "Found the best hazelnut coffee randomly. I'll bring you some this weekend." Diane responded with 7 prayer hands emojis. Jaewon, behind his closed office door, allowed himself exactly 1 second of satisfaction. Then he opened his laptop and went back to the quarterly projections. 3 weeks later, Derek mentioned in the chat that he was stressing about finding a summer internship. His GPA was solid, but his resume was thin, and the career fair at Stony Brook had been, in his words, a war zone of khaki pants and broken dreams. Diane told him to pray about it. Tanya told him to update his LinkedIn. Imani told him she'd look around. 5 days after that conversation, an email circulated through Hanel Technologies announcing a new summer internship program for college juniors and seniors interested in tech operations. The requirements were almost suspiciously aligned with Derek's profile. Communications or business majors, no prior tech experience required, mentorship included. Imani stared at the email for a long time. She forwarded it to Derek without comment. It hadn't occurred to her to wonder who had greenlit the program. Jaewon had buried it in a routine HR initiative, a line item in an operational memo that no one would trace back to a late-night text from a 22-year-old kid he'd never met. And then there was the vacation incident. Tanya, in one of her trademark voice note monologues, had gone on a 6-minute rant about how Imani hadn't taken a real vacation in over 2 years. She's going to burn out, Mama. She's going to combust. She's going to turn into one of those women who has a conversation with her stapler and thinks it's normal. Diane agreed. Derek sent the skull emoji. At the next staff meeting, Jaewon announced, with the same flat affect he used for everything, that the company would be restructuring its PTO calendar and that all employees with unused vacation days would be strongly encouraged to schedule time off within the next quarter. He looked at no one in particular when he said it, but the memo that followed landed in Imani's inbox with a yellow highlight on the relevant paragraph. Imani booked 4 days off. She went to Martha's Vineyard with Tanya and the baby. She sent photos to the group chat, sunsets, lobster rolls, the baby covered in sand. She looked happy. Jaewon read every message and saved none of them, and went for a longer run that evening than usual. The office started to notice. Not the grand gestures. Those were invisible. buried in corporate process and plausible deniability. But the micro shifts, the way Jaewon held the elevator when he saw Imani coming, instead of letting the doors close as he always had. The way he lingered for half a second after she handed him a report, as though he wanted to say something but hadn't yet built the sentence. The way he had started saying, "Thank you, Imani," instead of just "thank you." Her name added like a grace note, barely audible, but there. Christine from marketing mentioned it first, in the break room, over reheated pasta. Is it just me, or is he being less robotic? "He held the elevator for me yesterday," Daniel confirmed. "I almost dropped my laptop." Priya's eyes went wide. "He told me, 'Have a good evening' on Friday, with a period. Not an exclamation point, but still. Progress." Imani overheard these conversations and said nothing. She didn't want to be the subject of office theories, and she especially didn't want anyone to think she was the reason for the thaw. She was his assistant. She was professional. She was not going to become the woman the office whispered about. But she noticed, too. She noticed that he asked about her weekends now, not with warmth, exactly, but with something adjacent to it. She noticed that he had started ordering lunch for two on days when meetings ran long, without asking if she was hungry. She noticed that when she made a joke in a meeting, a dry, offhand comment about a client's impossible timeline, the corner of his mouth twitched in a way that could, with extreme generosity, be classified as almost a smile. She filed these observations in a mental folder labeled Unexplained and moved on. Meanwhile, the Brooks family madness continued its glorious, unrelenting programming. Diane got into a feud with a neighbor about a parking spot and narrated the entire saga in real time over 3 days. Tanya's toddler learned the word no and deployed it against every human being in a 2-mile radius. Derek changed his major again, this time to communications, which Diane called just talking with a degree, and which Imani quietly thought was perfect for him. And late one night, in the kind of message that only comes when the house is dark and the pretenses are down, Diane wrote something that stopped Jaewon cold. "I know I'm hard on you, Imani. I know I push. Your sister tells me I push too much, and maybe she's right. But baby, I buried your father when I was 42, and I've been standing in this house alone ever since. I push because I'm terrified you'll end up in a quiet house too. I don't want quiet for you. I want noise. I want someone who makes noise with you. I just want my baby to know she's enough. Even when I'm yelling, even when I'm being too much, you are enough. You always have been." Nobody responded for a long time. Then Imani sent a single red heart. Then Tanya sent a voice note that was just her crying. Then Derek sent a meme of someone hugging a pillow. And somehow that was the most eloquent response of all. Jaewon sat on the edge of his bed with his phone in both hands. He read the message 3 times. His thumb hovered over the keyboard. He watched the cursor blink against the empty text field. He wanted to say something. He wanted to tell this woman, this fierce, overbearing, magnificent woman he had never met, that her daughter was not going to end up in a quiet house, that her daughter walked into a room and rearranged the gravity of it, that her daughter was the most competent person he had ever worked with, and he had worked with people who ran countries, that the thing Diane called an attitude was actually the most extraordinary form of self-respect he had ever witnessed, and that any man who was intimidated by it deserved to be intimidated. He wanted to say all of that. He erased the blinking cursor. He set the phone on his nightstand. He lay back against the pillow and stared at the ceiling. He was in trouble. He knew that now. He was in deep, irreversible, completely uncharted trouble. The project that changed everything was called Meridian. It was a joint development initiative between Hanul's New York and Seoul offices, a new enterprise platform designed to break into the North American healthcare market. The timeline was brutal, 16 weeks from concept to prototype, with a live demo for 3 hospital networks and a round of investors that included one of the most ruthless venture capital firms on the East Coast. Jaewon was the executive lead, and because the project required constant coordination across time zones, late-night strategy sessions, and an assistant who could manage a calendar that now spanned 2 hemispheres, Imani became his shadow. They worked late. Often. The office would empty around 7. The cleaning crew would come and go, and the two of them would remain. Him at his desk reviewing architecture specs, her at the table outside his door managing the comms pipeline between New York and Seoul. They developed a rhythm. He would ask for something, a file, a contact, an updated brief, and she would have it ready before the sentence was finished. She anticipated him with an accuracy that bordered on telepathy, and he relied on her with a trust he didn't extend to anyone else in the company. The late nights turned into working dinners, not romantic ones, nothing that anyone could misconstrue. Takeout containers on a conference table, laptops open, the city glittering through the floor-to-ceiling windows while they debated presentation strategies and investor profiles. But the conversation started to drift. Not far, just enough. A comment about a restaurant he'd been meaning to try. A mention of a podcast she'd been listening to. Small offerings, placed carefully at the edges of the professional boundary, like flowers left on a windowsill. Imani learned things. She learned that he had a dry, precise sense of humor that surfaced only when he was tired, a deadpan observation about a client's absurd request, a perfectly timed pause before delivering a punchline so subtle she almost missed it. She learned that he listened in a way that most people didn't, not waiting for his turn to speak, but actually absorbing what was said, filing it away, returning to it days later with a reference so specific it startled her. She learned that he was generous in invisible ways, adjusting deadlines when a team member was struggling, mentioning junior employees by name in board reports so they'd get visibility, quietly covering the tab at team lunches and making it look like a company expense. She learned, slowly, and then all at once, that the cold man the office feared was a fiction, a performance, an armor he wore so well that he'd forgotten where it ended, and he began. And Jae-won learned things too. He learned that Imani hummed when she was concentrating, a low, tuneless sound she didn't seem to be aware of. He learned that she organized information spatially, covering conference tables with color-coded printouts like a general mapping a campaign. He learned that she was funny in a way that didn't perform. Her humor wasn't for the room, it was for herself, and if you happened to catch it, you were lucky. He learned that she carried her family's love and her family's weight in equal measure, and that both made her stronger, and that she would never, ever admit to being tired. He learned, slowly and then all at once, that he was not simply attracted to her. He was oriented toward her, like a compass needle finding north. The investor gala happened in early May. It was held at a rooftop venue in Chelsea, the kind of place with too many candles and not enough chairs, where everyone held drinks they didn't finish and smiled at people they didn't like. Jae-won moved through the room with practiced ease, shaking hands, delivering the pitch with quiet authority, steering conversations toward Meridian without ever seeming to push. Imani was there in a support role, managing the logistics, coordinating with the event team, making sure every investor had the right materials at the right moment. Midway through the evening, one of the investors, a man named Whitfield, mid-50s, 3 bourbons deep, cornered Imani near the bar. Questions about the timeline, apparently. He wanted to understand the operational infrastructure. But the questions were wrong, too personal, too directed at her rather than the project. How long had she been working under Jae-won? The emphasis he placed on the word under made her stomach tighten. Imani handled it. She always handled it. She redirected. She smiled professionally. She answered his actual questions and ignored his implications. She didn't flinch. She didn't waver. She stood her ground with the kind of composure that should have been unremarkable. But in that room, at that moment, was an act of quiet defiance. Jae-won saw it from across the room. He saw the shift in her posture, the rigidity in her smile, the way her hand tightened around her glass. He didn't storm over. He didn't make a scene. He waited until Whitfield drifted to the bar for a refill. Then he walked over and stood beside Imani, not touching her, not crowding her, just present. You handled that with more grace than he deserved. Imani looked at him, For a moment, her professional mask slipped, and he saw her, not the assistant, not the competent one, not the woman who handled everything. Just her, tired, proud, a little bit angry, a little bit grateful. I've had practice. You shouldn't need practice for that. It was such a simple sentence. 8 words, but the way he said it, without pity, without performance, without trying to be her hero, just acknowledging what it cost her, what it always cost her, cracked something open that she had spent a very long time sealing shut. They stood there for a moment, side by side, watching the room spin its glittering nonsense around them. And then the moment passed, and they went back to work, and neither of them mentioned it again. But something had shifted. The boundary had moved, and it wasn't going back. 3 weeks later, the email arrived. It wasn't meant for Imani. It was an internal communication from Seoul headquarters, addressed to Jaewon and the regional directors, CC'd to a distribution list that someone in IT had accidentally expanded to include executive support staff. The subject line was dry, bureaucratic, forgettable. Consolidation Review, North American Operations. The content was not forgettable. Seoul was reviewing the viability of maintaining a standalone New York office. Market conditions, operational costs, redundancy with the new Toronto hub. The language was clinical, but the meaning was clear. They were considering shutting it down, pulling the team, recalling Jaewon to Seoul. Imani read the email twice. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was steady. Everything about her was steady, because she had trained herself to be steady in moments that wanted to knock her sideways. But her mind was a storm. She wasn't thinking about her job. She had skills, experience, a network. She would land somewhere. She was thinking about the man behind the glass door, whose voice she heard more than any other voice in her life. The man who had started asking if she'd eaten. The man who remembered that she liked her tea with honey because he'd heard her mention it once, in passing, 3 months ago. The man who looked at her sometimes, just for a fraction of a second, just long enough to catch if you were watching. Like she was the most important thing in the room. She was thinking about losing him. And that thought, not the job, not the office, not the career implications. That thought was the one that took her breath away. The news spread through the office like wildfire. Within 48 hours, everyone knew. The mood turned funereal. People updated their resumes. Christine from marketing cried in the bathroom. Daniel started taking calls from recruiters without bothering to lower his voice. The 90-person operation that Jaewon had built from nothing began to feel like a body waiting for a diagnosis. Jaewon said nothing publicly. He held a brief all-hands meeting, acknowledged the review, assured the team that no decisions had been made, and returned to his office with the door closed. He was calm. He was measured. He was exactly the leader the moment required. But Imani knew his rhythms. She knew that he had canceled his Sunday run for the first time in 2 years. She knew that his coffee consumption had doubled. She knew that he was staying past midnight, and that the lights in his office burned long after the cleaning crew had gone home. Something was eating him alive, and he was letting it, because that's what men like him did. They let the fire burn inward and called it discipline. That night, Imani opened the family chat. She didn't plan what she was going to say. The words just came, pulled out of her by a gravity she couldn't resist. I think I'm losing someone, and I didn't even know I had him. The response was immediate. Diane called, not texted, called, and Imani let it go to voicemail. Tanya sent a gentle message. Take your time, sis. We're here. Derek, for once, didn't send a meme. He sent 3 words. We got you. And then Diane typed the follow-up, because Diane always typed the follow-up. Baby, if you feel it, fight for it. Love isn't something that shows up convenient. It shows up inconvenient and you fight for it anyway. Jaewon read every word. He read, I think I'm losing someone. And his hand tightened around the phone. He read, I didn't even know I had him. And something in him broke open. Not shattered, not destroyed, just opened. like a window that had been painted shut for years finally giving way. He read Diane's response. He read it twice, and this time, he didn't hesitate. He typed a message, 3 sentences, and pressed send. Mrs. Brooks, I apologize for being in this chat uninvited for so long. Your daughter added my number by accident weeks ago, and I should have said something immediately. But I want you to know, she is not losing anyone. The chat went silent. Completely, catastrophically silent. And then Diane Brooks, a woman who had never in her life been at a loss for words, typed in all capitals, Imani Elise Brooks. Who is this man in our chat? Derek sent a meme of a mushroom cloud. Tanya sent a voice note that was just screaming. Imani stared at her phone with the expression of a woman watching a building collapse in slow motion, a building she happened to be standing inside. She didn't text back. She didn't call. She grabbed her jacket and her keys, and she left. 22 minutes later, she was standing in the lobby of Jay Wan's building on the Upper West Side, out of breath, hair wild, heart hammering against her ribs like it was trying to escape. He opened the door in a plain t-shirt and sweatpants, and the shock of seeing him outside the armor, outside the suits, outside the office, outside the glass walls and the titanium posture, was almost more disorienting than the message. You were in the chat. Her voice was shaking. Not with anger. With something bigger than anger. Something that encompassed fury and humiliation and relief and terror all at once. This whole time, you were reading everything. Yes. The stuff about my